Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a video on different caramel notes in perfumery. So I would put caramel notes as a subcategory of what's more generally known as gourmand notes. So if you haven't heard the term gourmand before, it's essentially, well, it's really a family of perfumes, and it's the kind of perfumes that go for, let's say, sweet edible smells. So if you have a perfume with something like a vanilla ice cream smell or a cheesecake smell, chocolate smell, coffee, hazelnuts, pie, all of that kind of thing, then that's kind of classed as what's called a gourmand perfume, and those notes are, let's say, gourmand notes. Now, there are a lot of different types of gourmand notes, but what I think, or at least what I would define as one specific subcategory of them, is the caramel notes. Now, if you're into chemistry and you have a look at most of these aroma chemicals for caramel notes, what you'll find is most of them are actually furans, or they have a furan structure. Essentially what this means is that you've got a ring of 5 atoms, and you've got 4 of them being carbons, 1 of them being an oxygen, and it's an aromatic ring, so essentially you've got a delocalized electron cloud. Now, don't worry if you don't know much about chemistry, it doesn't really affect how you're actually going to go and use these in a perfume. It's just interesting if you do have some chemical knowledge, you go and look at the molecular structure diagram and you notice that motif, then there's a good chance that it may be a caramelic note, or just more in general, some gourmand note, because some of these other furans are also different gourmand notes. For example, one of them smells like coffee. You can also get one that smells like malt and bread, that kind of thing. Maybe I'll do a future video on some more of these other gourmand categories at some point. If you're interested in that, just let me know down in the comments. So anyway, this video, I've got 5 different caramel notes for you. I'm going to smell them all at 1% dilution on the scent strip. That's a bit lower than the usual 10% that I do, and the reason for that is because, well, these things are quite strong, so actually a little goes a long way, and you would only really be using these at trace amounts or very small amounts in your perfume unless you're really going to overdose them. And even then, for an overdose of these notes, you don't actually need to use that much. Okay, so we're going to start off with something called maple lactone. Now, this one is quite interesting because I've done a video about this before, and in the past, especially when I first got this, I remember it really smelling a bit like maple syrup. And it's kind of like the smell of maple syrup, but also mixed with fenugreek, which is a spice. Now, to me, fenugreek has this kind of, let's say, musty, back of the spice closet kind of smell. Now, interestingly, this maple lactone, which I actually bought this from Pell Wall about 4 years ago, and it was originally diluted down to 10% in ethanol. And what I've noticed is that when I went to go and smell this today, I went and made a new 1% dilution from that 10%. And for some reason today, it actually no longer smells like maple syrup. It actually now, at least when you first dip it in, it smells like kind of strawberries, which is, well, at first thoughts that may sound a bit odd, but what I also know is there is another one of these furans, another one of these very similar molecules that's used in perfumery called strawberry furanone, and the structure is actually very similar. Unfortunately, I don't actually have that, so I can't smell it for you guys and let you know what it's like. Now, once that strawberry smell has gone off, which did take about half an hour or so, then it did start to tend towards its old smell, which was more caramelic and a bit maple syrup-like. So that, again, is, I find, quite often the side of a byproduct, usually when you have a certain note that you're not expecting when you're smelling one of your older dilutions, and then over time on the scent strip, it starts to smell like its original thing that you're expecting again. So that's maple lactone. If you want to make a maple syrup note inside of your perfumes, then this is the one to use. Right, next up we have another one here, and this one's called caramel furanone, also known as sotalone. Now, this one actually smells a lot like I remember the maple lactone to originally smell like. And again, it's got these caramel notes mixed with this kind of fenugreek note, though this one smells less like maple syrup specifically and a little bit more like kind of toffee in general. Now, this one isn't my favorite, and that's because of this kind of musty fenugreek note that it's got to it. And for me, I just find it quite hard to see myself using that in a perfume. Usually with a sweetened note, I would want it to be a clean sweetness, and this note doesn't give that for me. So then you may be asking then, if those two don't necessarily smell the best, or they have this fenugreek note, which you may not want, what can you use instead? So this one I've got here, called caramel acetate, I find to be very nice. This one has the caramel note, but this time, instead of that kind of fenugreek note, this one doesn't have that, but instead it's just a lot cleaner, and it smells like a clean, sweet caramel. If I had to describe it, this one smells like caramel sauce. So if you really just wanted a straight up caramel smell for your perfumes, then caramel acetate, this is probably the one I'd recommend to you. Moving on then, we've got another one which is quite nice and clean smelling. I'd say it's similar to the caramel acetate in that regard. And this one is actually my favorite, and this one is called Homofuraneol. Now to me, what this one smells like is burnt sugar, and it also smells like butterscotch and fudge. So I just think it's got a really nice scent profile. I guess maybe it's because I used to really love fudge when I was a kid. Could be something to do with that. Okay, so finally we have the last one, which is ethyl maltol, and this one is by far the most famous of all of these aroma chemicals. I would definitely recommend this being in your beginner's perfumery palette. If you're a beginner in perfumery and you don't have this, then I recommend picking some up. I may even do a separate video on it at some point. Now this molecule is famous, and it's really famous for, I would say, kind of being at the center of the gourmand category. So one of the foundational perfumes of the gourmand category is Angel by Mugler, and that perfume really made use of a special accord between ethyl maltol and patchouli. So if you want to make a kind of gourmand fragrance, you can go and try that accord yourself. Now another perfume that this molecule is famously used in is Baccarat Rouge, which you could say uses a bit of an overdose of it. And I think it's something like 2% in the formula, which doesn't sound like much, but given how strong this stuff is, it's actually a fair amount. This stuff you can put in your perfumes at trace amounts, and it still offers a noticeable kind of sweetening, let's say, effect. But if you go and use it at a high level, it really goes and adds an intense sweet smell. So talking about the smell, what does it actually smell like? Well, I would put this as a caramelic note. It still has caramel nuances to it, but I wouldn't say it's quite as straight up caramel like the ones before. The ones before really made you think something like toffee or caramel sauce, whereas this one just has caramelic facets to it. Now this one reminds me a little bit as well of strawberry jam. That's something it's commonly described as, although I wouldn't necessarily say the strawberry really comes through too much, just more of a general kind of, let's say that jammy smell you've got. Another thing it smells a little bit like is candy floss. And in fact, if you want to go and make your own candy floss accord, then Jean-Claude Lehner, quite famous perfumer, he says you can just go and mix some of this ethyl maltol with some vanillin, which is a classic vanilla aroma chemical. Anyway, that's it really, pretty short video, but if you're interested in these caramel notes, then I think hopefully you've got all of the information here that you really need. If you're a beginner and you just want one kind of caramel note or a general note in this territory that you could go and use, then just pick up ethyl maltol. If you want to dive deeper and actually go and make your own caramel accord, toffee accord, or something similar, then I would recommend picking up the other ones that I mentioned in this video and then going and blending maybe some of these together and maybe using some other things like vanillin to really go and fine-tune your own custom caramel note. Now, if you're interested in making some of those dilutions yourself, because these things are quite strong and I've diluted mine down to 1%, then I really would recommend doing it in a good quality bottle like these Winchester bottles with a polycone cap. And these help stop the raw materials evaporating through the cap over time. If you're interested in picking some of these up, then you can find them in the link in the description below in my online store. And by purchasing them from there, you also help support me and the channel. Now, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. And I'll see you next time with another video all about perfumery.